Hello and welcome to Traumatic Impact, a show that explores the many causes of traumatic brain injury and the impact TBI has on our society. I'm Jared Pawar.
And I'm Matthew Cox. Today's headlines warn of the consequences of too many hits to the head. An Ohio State University athlete commits suicide, blaming too many concussions during his brief life. The NFL comes to an agreement with former players who now have brain diseases like Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig's diseases due to a lifetime of head trauma.
During today's program, we will introduce you to some of the victims of traumatic brain injury. We'll also provide the most up-to-date research on TBI and spotlight a few of the experts who research and treat these people.
A massive vehicle airbag recall affecting millions of cars in the U.S. has our government, safety experts, and car owners questioning the safety of motor vehicles on American roads. Our cars may be cherished possessions, but motor vehicles accidents are also a leading cause of brain trauma.
According to a study done by the Colorado Injury Control Research Center, traumatic brain injuries cost over $2.5 billion yearly for hospitals to treat. And according to the 2007 Scholarly Journal of Neurorehabilitation, 60% of all TBIs are caused by traffic accidents. Also, as stated by the Journal of Rehabilitation Psychology, 3.5 million Americans receive a TBI yearly, and over 50,000 of them will die from these injuries. Of those that survive, many will have long-lasting effects. These statistics can come as a shock, especially because generally, people do not even know TBI exists, or if they do, they don't think about it often. Traumatic brain injury is a huge issue in the United States and in the world today. The World Health Organization stated formally in 2007 that they predict TBI, specifically car accident-related TBI, to be at least the third leading cause of premature deaths among all age categories by the year 2020. Rebecca Thomas is a physical therapist as well as a certified balance and vestibular specialist at Salisbury Physical Therapy. She spoke about her knowledge and experience with TBI.
A TBI is a traumatic brain injury. So there's been damage or an injury done to the brain itself and or the spinal cord. That they can oftentimes they occur together rather than just as separate entities, and we treat them very much the same way. So every traumatic brain injury is different when it comes to symptoms that the individual has to the damage that will be done to the brain itself. Initially, there's oftentimes swelling, bruising, bleeding that can occur on the brain itself, and then oftentimes that leaves kind of like a black space that'll be in the brain. And it may be in one area, there may be multiple areas from this shearing sensation that the brain can go through. There's also a very significant emotional aspect to it. Sadness, happiness, things that are unexplained, like people laughing when they're in pain. And those are some of the more common things that I've seen with treating some of these traumatic brain injuries.
Michael Peters is a longtime sufferer of a severe TBI brought on by a car accident as a teenager.
Luckily for me, the majority of my cells that were damaged had to do mostly with my physical attributes and not necessarily my mental attributes. So, I mean, I had a trouble with my memory in the beginning, but that's pretty much come back to me now. And my speech, as you can tell, has been affected, but my mental capacity has not been affected. I'm still smart as a whip.
A 17-year-old Michael Peters left a party June 4th, 1994 at 4 a.m. after a night of drinking and partying. He had 4 hours to get home, get dressed, and be back in court by 8 a.m. for his trial focusing on his 8 past traffic violations. However, he never made it home. He fell asleep behind the wheel and crashed into a tree at an excess of 80 miles per hour. His heart stopped 3 times on the way to the hospital and was in a coma for 40 days. He has never been the same since.
Basically, I have been suffering throughout my whole life, well, since my accident, been suffering because I haven't had any money to do anything with, so very hard to do anything because I can't work, I can't bring in income, and a little bit of money I get like from disability, Social Security sends me they were sending me $550 a month. Then I had some children, and now they take out child support before I see it, so I only get $108 a month. And now that I just got married, I'm not getting anything.
After years of rehabilitation after his first accident, Michael Peters was in a second serious car accident, this time destroying his legs and forever altering his ability to walk.
And and cut my legs and the knees and shattered both my legs and the knees down. So I had 8 shattered joints, 8 shattered bones in my legs and the knees down, and I was in the wheelchair, the hospital bed, the wheelchair, the walker, the cane again, all over again, and it was very, very hard, very difficult, but things happen and you just do what you have to do to get by, right?
Sheriff Mike Lewis of the Wacomico County Sheriff's Office has years of experience with car accidents and the traumatic brain injuries that follow.
I have seen many fatal accidents over the years, but I've seen many serious wrecks as well. Wrecks where individuals have suffered severe trauma. Don't let anyone tell you seat belts do not save lives, because they do save lives. They save lives dramatically.
Sheriff Mike Lewis is now at the end of his 2nd term and about to begin his 3rd 4-year term on December 2nd, 2014. He has been in law enforcement for over 31 years.
I will tell you the leading cause of death today for all individuals between the ages of 15 and 24. In that bracket alone, the leading cause of death for those individuals is motor vehicle collisions. Leading cause of death. I mean, that's a pretty chilling statistic right there. I responded to a motor vehicle collision. When I got on the scene, there were 2 young girls that had been ejected from the car. Neither was wearing a seatbelt at the time of the collision. What I did notice is that vehicle had a temporary tag on it. It was brand new car. In fact, she'd only had it 2 days. But these 2 girls had been involved in a motor vehicle collision and they had been ejected from a car. It wasn't their fault. But when I got on the scene, clearly one of them was dead. The other one was alive, and I sat down in the middle of the roadway with her. My police car had blocked the road with my overhead lights on. And I reassured this young girl that she was going to make it. She was talking to me. She didn't look to be that badly injured at all. And as I was talking with her, I'd worked my way under her head and shoulders and was lying there talking to her, reassuring her that the ambulance was on its way. I could hear the sirens coming. I knew she was going to be okay. She didn't appear to be that badly injured. And as I'm talking to her, she took her last breath of air. She died. She had severe internal brain injury that I didn't recognize initially, and it wouldn't have made any difference. There's nothing I could have done to save her. But in her hand at the time she died was a Mother's Day card that she had just bought from the Ames department store in Berlin. This was Mother's Day, and she was headed home with this Mother's Day card. And when I met with her family several days later after her funeral, they came to collect her belongings at the Maryland State Police Barrack in Berlin. And I had to hand that Mother's Day card to the mother. And I told her, I said, this is what your daughter held in her hand when she died. You can imagine the impact that would have on any family member. But I can't emphasize the importance of wearing seatbelts. I can't emphasize the importance of no texting and using a hands-free device. It's easy to do, man. We all can do something to help one another. And that little thing could save the life of an innocent person.
Since the establishment of the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act of 1970, the goal of the organization, according to the AllGov website, is to save lives, prevent injuries, and reduce economic costs related to road traffic accidents, and approach it through a 3-fold strategy of public education and funding, research and safety standards, and investigations and enforcement. Robbie Pasquith of the Salisbury, Maryland Chevrolet dealership's job is to be up to date on what safety features cars nowadays have to keep you safer while driving.
First thing we're going to talk about your backup camera. Now, we have a nice 8-inch display here. Besides having the camera back there, you're also going to have a distance indicator showing you how close you're getting to something. And one of the other cool features on this Suburban right here is you actually have true path. Basically, your distance indicator actually changes and shows you the actual path you're going to take as you're backing up. Another thing you want to see is how many airbags is in this vehicle. You're going to, of course, have the airbag here. You got an airbag on the passenger side. You have head curtains that pop out going down for the outboard passengers. One of the new features that are starting to be in the vehicles is the airbag that's going to pop right out the driver's side right here. And basically, if you had a side collision, when this airbag deploys, it's going to keep basically the driver and the passenger from colliding heads.
Mr. Pasquith states, however, that safety is not always a major concern among customers.
During the selling process, we do start hitting on safety, but overall I wouldn't say that customers come right to the lot and that's the first thing that they ask about. It is definitely selling features that we talk about on the vehicles, but I would think the general public automatically assumes that all vehicles are safe, and maybe they should concern themselves more, because I know with the government crash ratings on our vehicle, they're a lot higher than other manufacturers, and that kind of gets thrown to the wayside.
There are already millions of people in the United States today that have permanent side effects from a previously experienced TBI.
Many of these people fall through the cracks. They get very frustrated. Many of them become more dependent on other medications and other things that are out there, either to manage pain, for psychological benefits, for some different things, and then they no longer become productive people in our society. And most of these people want nothing more than to be independent and to be on their own.
If you want to know how I feel sad that I can't do what I used to be able to do. I feel inadequate at times because I don't have the money to pay my bills. What if I'm not able to provide for my wife? What if I'm not able to provide for myself? I've been there before. I've been out on the street. I've been kicked out of my place and I had no idea what I was going to do. It's very scary. That's a very scary time.
The Journal of Rehabilitation Psychology predicts that 3.5 million people will be diagnosed with a TBI over the next 12 months in the United States alone. Anyone can be affected by a TBI, and repercussions can last a lifetime. Experts say safer cars can help, but safer drivers are the key to reducing these numbers. For Traumatic Impact, this is Ethan Klassing.
When we come back, we'll tell you what government department is calling traumatic brain injury its signature injury.
But before the break, we polled Salisbury to find out how much people would be willing to spend for a safer vehicle.
Yeah, I'll probably pay any amount, to ensure my car is going to keep me safe.
I would definitely pay a considerable amount more, probably like $20,000, $30,000, because your life is worth it.
Being a delivery driver for Papa John's, it definitely would be nice to know that my car would keep me safe while I'm making my runs.
I'd probably spend a lot more because, knowing firsthand, because my uncle was in a traumatic car accident and he was brain damaged because of it.
A friend of mine is in the nursing home for the rest of his life because he had a traumatic brain injury in an accident, so I wouldn't want that.
You sure you don't want some? It's chamomile. Listen, you are extremely terrifying. Just the scariest undead subhuman thing on TV, and I really mean that. But I am worried that you could give my kids nightmares if they see you, so I'm gonna have to block you. So that's it. Oh, and tell the zombies they're blocked too.
And as nearly 2 million soldiers return home from deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, the number of veterans with brain-related injuries may challenge our nation's healthcare system for the next 5 decades or more. These soldiers must now adapt to life with brain injury and prepare for a new kind of fight, a bureaucratic one.
Traumatic brain injury has steadily become one of the most common medical conditions for returning U.S. veterans of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. According to the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center, 31% of U.S. military personnel evacuated from Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom in 2007 and transported to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. had traumatic brain injury. One of the main reasons for the exceptionally high number of blast injuries causing TBI in military personnel cases during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars compared to prior conflicts is due to the increased use of improvised explosive devices, otherwise known as IEDs. 41% of U.S. military casualties in Iraq are estimated to have been a consequence of the use of IEDs. IEDs are essentially makeshift bombs designed to explode next to military vehicles and are often camouflaged in basic daily items like luggage, animal carriers, and food containers. This now common injury has been given the label the signature injury of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars by the Department of Defense and has grown to be a primary focus of research regarding its causes and long-term effects. With moderate to severe levels of TBI, the signs of an injury are more often detectable on an MRI scan. However, cases of mild TBI are often too difficult to accurately diagnose due to the wounds not being clearly visible. Lynn Bailey Hamill, a neurology nurse practitioner at the Baltimore VA Medical Center, explains the reasons behind misdiagnosing and delayed treatment for mild TBI.
The traumatic brain injury itself can cause mood disorders. It can exhibit itself, rather, as having a mood disorder, or can be some processing in their thoughts disorder. It can be memory. So that when you combine all those things together, and then the headaches, then it becomes difficult to know which one is really causing the problems that appear to be TBI-like symptoms.
When soldiers are on deployment, the challenge of determining head injuries following an IED blast is greater because soldiers may experience loss of consciousness and post-traumatic amnesia. As a result, soldiers may be unable to recall the events of an IED exposure when it is initially reported. Jason Gray, a retired Army veteran, shares his blackout experience that caused his brain trauma.
I was at Walter Reed and I didn't know where I was. Last thing I remember was on the battlefield. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know anything about anything. I just knew that I had a hell of a headache. I had drugs being pumped into me. I had a tube down my throat. So the doctor, when they realized I was awake, came in and said I had TBI.
In some cases, returning veterans are foregoing proper medical treatment for a number of reasons. One reason is the fear of being stigmatized for having TBI and the concern over an official diagnosis interfering with their chances for career advancement. There are some veterans that do not seek medical care because they may perceive their TBI symptoms to be normal side effects after an IED blast and believe their mental discomfort will eventually disappear. In a 2014 case study published in Military Medicine, 27 U.S. veterans were tested for mild TBI, and the results for each of the participants came back positive for having mild TBI. All 27 veterans claimed they were unaware of having an existing condition. The findings in the study demonstrate the potential shock and concern veterans with brain trauma face, not realizing the danger to their mental health sooner rather than later. According to the August 2009 issue of Rehabilitation Psychology, between 12 and 22% of military personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan were returning home with TBI. Veterans who may not have displayed symptoms of TBI during deployment could inevitably show signs of the condition once they are stateside. The soldiers who do not seek proper medical treatment or decide to self-manage their condition run a substantial health risk. Lynn Bailey Hamill discusses these risks in detail.
Since many of them have chronic pain issues, whether it be headaches or backaches or neck aches, and also their knees, they tend to self-medicate. This could be over-the-counter medications, which can cause problems with taking a episodic headache disorder and making it a chronic daily disorder. If they're not seeking treatment for their backs, they can get worse, and they will turn to, not all of them, but some of them will turn to substance abuse and use that in order to cope with the pain or to alleviate the pain. And then also, since many of them also have post-traumatic stress disorder, if they're not receiving treatment for that, then the alcohol and drugs will be used to medicate those and to calm down mood swings as well as depression or anxiety.
The effects of TBI on untreated veterans have led to a rise in suicide cases. Michael S. Baker claims in the April 2014 edition of Military Medicine that suicide among military men ages 17 to 60 account for 20% of the overall population, including civilians. It is estimated that the average of veterans who unknowingly lived with TBI and who ultimately committed suicide equals 1 death per day. The Department of Defense is responsible for military health care when soldiers are on deployment, but upon their return, the Department of Veteran Affairs takes charge of service members wounded in action. For many veterans with and without TBI, the transition into the VA system has been very problematic. Retired Marine veteran and Maryland native Vincent Federici was diagnosed with narcolepsy resulting from TBI sustained during active duty, but was initially rated with 0% disability and denied benefits by the Department of Defense and Veteran Affairs.
I was insulted with how it came back. I was rated as 0% across the board. I had submitted so many medical documents, things that were obvious that I'm not just a normal person walking around on the street. There's things wrong with me, and I'm going to need medical attention and care for the rest of my life. What would have happened if I would have accepted those findings was I would have been out of the Marine Corps within probably a month or so, and I would have received a severance paycheck. It would have been at least $15,000 payoff, basically, but that wasn't acceptable to me. I had things, I need continuous care and coverage for my issues. So my package went back up, I resubmitted it, and then the second time through, it took about 4 or 5 months again. So my total time at this point, give or take around 10 months or so, just sitting waiting for a phone call every day to, that's going to decide the rest of my life as far as medical care and coverage. It came back with a rating for the Department of Defense side that was high enough to have me retired, had me temporarily retired, and the VA rating had gone from 0% to 100%.
According to a 2010 study in the Journal of General Internal Medicine, only 37% of returning veterans said they would choose to benefit from the VA healthcare plan, while the majority of participating veterans claimed they were unaware of what the VA has to offer. Then there are veterans like Jason Gray who choose an alternative healthcare provider other than the VA.
I choose not to deal with the VA. If it's a Monday or Friday and a nice day, you can believe you had a doctor's appointment, it's going to get canceled or rescheduled. I mean, basically they work Tuesday through Thursday. TRICARE is taking really good care of me. They work out really well. I can choose my doctor. I don't have to go to a VA hospital. I don't have to go to a base. I can decide what I want to do and what I don't want to do and what medications I want to take and what I don't want to take.
The emotional strain of TBI not only impacts the veterans with the condition, but their loved ones as well. Jason Gray and Vincent Federici explain how TBI emotionally affects their families and loved ones.
With my fiance, it's just a lot of aggravation for her to deal with stuff that I can't deal with, like doctor's appointments, remembering this for me, remember that for me, reminding me to do this, reminding me to do that. Everyday stuff that, if you have to be somewhere at a certain time or something like that, just bad time management, but it's not overwhelming. Most people can deal with it.
Anybody that I'm going to be close with the rest of my life, they're going to be on the receiving end of any kind of anger issues. If I'm depressed, they're going to be depressed for no reason. It's bad enough that I'll be depressed for things that I can't control or change, but it's even worse that somebody who loves me is depressed because they can't change the things about me. I was divorced within 7 months of getting out of the Marine Corps. Whole long custody battle, and certain things about the TBI were brought up in the divorce. And after I'd been defending myself in the Marine Corps for a whole year or so against people calling me fake or people treating me like that, I get out and have to defend myself to on the civilian side also.
TBI in the military is a growing concern and has been under scrutiny as of late. As the conflicts in the Middle East continue, the possibility remains for servicemen to return home with a form of traumatic brain injury. Although veterans face the challenge of moving forward with TBI, veterans like Jason Gray do not regret their time in service and their sacrifice for their country.
It was worth it. It was worth it to, defend the rights and freedoms of our country. Instead of letting somebody come over here and tell us what we're going to believe and how we're going to believe it. Our rights and freedoms are utmost important. That's what makes us Americans, what makes us the best country. So yeah, it was worth it. And if I died for it, it was worth it then too.
For Traumatic Impact, I'm Kevin Reynolds.
When we come back, we'll look at how traumatic brain injuries impact one of our most fragile groups, our kids.
But first, we asked people in Salisbury whether they think the U.S. government should supply war veterans with free health care. Here's what they said.
Yeah, it's kind of the government's way of paying them back. I guess it should be.
It's not like the fact of whether they should or not, because they should, but they should do it effectively and efficiently.
It's our responsibility to make sure that they're able to assimilate back into society.
It's kind of their job. They're fighting for this country. I don't understand why they can't get free health care.
It's hard for them to, get reaccustomed to life outside of, the war zone, stuff of that nature. And I think it would be like a great idea if we could, manage to get that stuff at the very least for our soldiers.
You sure you don't want some? It's chamomile. Listen, you are extremely terrifying. Just the scariest undead subhuman thing on TV, and I really mean that. But I am worried that you could give my kids nightmares if they see you, so I'm gonna have to block you. So that's it. Oh, and tell the zombies they're blocked too.
The Brain Injury Association reports that on average, over 500,000 children with traumatic brain injuries visit an emergency room every year. Some of those injuries will permanently impact these kids and the way they learn. That's a lifelong battle for them and their families. But it also tests how well our educational system can adapt to these special learners.
Education is an important asset to the mind of a child. As they progress through life, we see how they adapt and assess the world around them. This holds especially true for children with a traumatic brain injury, or TBI. A TBI, as described by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, is caused by a bump, blow, or jolt to the head, or a penetrating head injury that disrupts the normal function of the brain. Children can be prone to a brain injury early on in life because their body, especially the head, is still developing. The CDC claims 1.7 million people sustain a TBI annually, and almost 500,000 emergency department visits are made from children ages 0 to 14 years old. According to the New York State Department of Health, falls are the leading cause of hospitalized children due to a TBI. The most common falls are from one level to another, such as stairs, steps, or falls from beds. They also report that the most severe cause of a TBI comes from motor vehicle traffic-related injuries. They state 40% of children hospitalized due to a traffic-related injury incur a TBI, which includes vehicle occupants, pedestrians, and bicyclists. But it's what happens after the injury that can be concerning for parents of these children. Learning is an intensive process, not to mention for those with a traumatic brain injury. And for children, it's important that proper attention is given to adapt to these problems. Travis Jester was 7 years old when he was diagnosed with having a traumatic brain injury. And now Travis just celebrated his 21st birthday and explains what he remembers from that day.
The only thing I remember is coming home from school and running out into the backyard and sitting on top of logs, and that's all I remember.
14 years ago, after returning home from school, Travis and his brother Jeff went to the backyard just like any other day. Jeff began shooting his new BB gun through knotholes, but one bounced off and hit Travis in his left temple. Travis's mom, Desiree, describes her initial reaction.
I just remember him laying upside down in the wood pile and me, just thinking, oh my God, and screaming for somebody to help. Nobody was home. My husband wasn't home. The neighbors weren't home.
After being taken to Peninsula Regional Medical Center, they determined that the bullet had gone through Travis's brain and would affect his emotional responses. He was then flown to Johns Hopkins and sent to the intensive care unit, which he was in for 2.5 weeks until he was able to breathe on his own. Then Travis and his family moved to Kennedy Krieger Institute, where he stayed for 3 months. Desiree reflects on the emotional state of her son after suffering from a TBI.
So if he had to lift his arm to eat, that made him cry. If he had to go to the bathroom, that made him cry. But once he kind of got over that hump, it just kind of happened. Mm-hmm. He always smiled and always just, whatever he had to do, he did it.
Memory problems like recalling new material, processing information, and behavioral performance are just a few of the cognitive effects of a TBI. In Travis's case, being reintroduced to Ocean City Elementary School was about being a part of the educational environment, not necessarily retaining the information. Travis and Desiree described the difficulty of going back to school.
It felt really weird because I just went through a long process. So I didn't even feel like I was even ready to go back to school.
He only went to school like a couple of days a week, just to get him back to his friends, but he wasn't doing anything really in the classroom. He was doing a lot of physical therapy and speech therapy, and any kind of therapy they had to offer, they did.
Children can not only face difficulties in learning, but other behavioral and social challenges as well. Some parents may seek out the help of a speech and language therapist to help their child. These therapists help patients learn strategies for improving memory, problem solving, and reasoning, as well as general communication skills. Kathy Luders has been an occupational therapist at Cedar Chapel Special School for 9 years now. She explains the challenges of working with children with disabilities.
What's different about children is that you have to first identify where they're functioning developmentally. We know what adults are supposed to be like. We understand that. But when you have a 5-year-old that now has had a head injury, he's no longer a 5-year-old. He's functioning differently. So how you interact and approach and communicate and maybe have to be different than what you would typically do for a 5-year-old.
Kathy has also worked for the Ranchos Los Amigos National Rehabilitation Center in Downey, California, where she worked with a pediatric unit that involves several cases of traumatic brain injuries. Kathy says that being a therapist requires responsibility and attentiveness to a difficult ordeal.
You get a child in, you know that child belongs to somebody who really loves them. So your goal is to do everything you can so that that child can get back to where they are. And sometimes it's not easy, but in the end, to know that you had a part in that recovery and that you know you made a difference in that child's life that's the best reward you can ever have.
Throughout the recovery process, many therapists play a vital role in helping patients, and no one has had a bigger part in Travis's case than his own therapist, who he says had his back no matter what.
My therapist, Ms. Joan, she was one of my best therapists. She helped me through everything. And that was pretty good.
Kathy explains what it means to her after helping a patient and their family cope with this condition.
I had one of the cases I remember was a 17-year-old who had a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. That, you never know how a 17-year-old could do that. But after getting to know him and his parents and being part of all that, I wouldn't change it for the world.
However, cost plays a huge economic role for these children and their families. The Center for Head Injury Services claims that the cost of a severe brain injury often exceeds $4 million, including emergency visits, therapy, and rehabilitation. They also report that approximately 1 in 500 school-aged children each year will receive a head injury severe enough to be hospitalized. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says approximately $9 to $10 billion is spent for acute care and rehabilitation of brain injury patients every year. And that total cost is what Kathy explains can change for every person.
So much depends upon the type of injury, how long they're in acute care, how long they're in rehab. Our healthcare system's changed, and that doesn't happen anymore. So the amount of time that they're staying in each phase is shortened.
But these kids are our future, and they will pave the way for others to succeed as well. It's not the injury that makes people like Travis extraordinary. It's how they adapt to their condition themselves that truly amazes people.
And just tell them it's a long process, but you'll get through it fine. It's going to just take a while, and you'll probably be okay.
In 2011, Congress passed legislation that would allocate $1 million for brain injury rehabilitation. For Traumatic Impact, I'm Taylor Rogers.
Traumatic brain injuries aren't only sustained from blunt force trauma. Sometimes an attack on the brain comes from within your own body. We'll also tell you about a controversial technique for treating traumatic brain injury that has experts skeptical and patients hopeful.
But first, we surveyed local residents on their views of integrating children with traumatic brain injuries into traditional grade school classes.
I think that even though they've been injured, I think that they still deserve to have a great education with other children as well.
I really think it's important for their future. It's good for their growth to be kind of submerged in a normal environment.
I think they should be fully integrated, just for their benefit and the benefit of the kids around them, and everybody deserves that kind of school experience.
If they're able to comprehend and everything, like the regular students, I feel like then they should definitely be in the classroom.
You sure you don't want some? It's chamomile. Listen, you are extremely terrifying. Just the scariest undead subhuman thing on TV, and I really mean that. But I am worried that you could give my kids nightmares if they see you, so I'm gonna have to block you. So that's it. Oh, and tell the zombies they're blocked too.
Sometimes it's not something as severe as war or blunt force trauma that brings about a serious brain injury. Sometimes it's smaller. Microscopic bacteria can also cause irreparable harm to the brain in these cases. Everyday interaction with friends, family, and work colleagues can have devastating effects.
Imagine you are a senior in college, just weeks away from graduation. You're young, healthy, and have a plan for your future. Then, over the course of one single night, your whole life changes.
Within one day, I went from being totally healthy, 22 years old, life just laid out in front of me, to being almost dead. But by the time I arrived at KU Med that night, my chances of survival were basically a coin flip.
Journalist and meningitis survivor Andy Marceau was in his final year at Kansas University when he contracted a deadly form of meningitis.
It came on very suddenly. It was like the night before. I was out covering a softball game for a small newspaper, and I had this shiver go up my back. And within an hour of that first shiver, I was just shaking uncontrollably. I had cold sweats, I felt nauseous, and just generally very quickly felt very sick, but it all seemed very much like the flu.
Unbeknownst to Marceau, these flu-like symptoms were actually the early onset stages of bacterial meningitis.
At the time, though, I was 22 years old. I was perfectly healthy. I'd never spent the night in the hospital, so I didn't think it could be anything serious.
According to the National Institute of Neurological Disease and Stroke, the two most common strains of meningitis, being pneumococcal and meningococcal meningitis, combine to affect around 8,000 people in the U.S. annually. While meningitis can be contracted through various means such as a virus, fungus, or parasite, clinical microbiologist Beth Prouse offers insight as to why bacterial meningitis exists as the most serious form.
Meningitis is an inflammation of the meninges, and the meninges is the protective covering of the brain and the spinal cord. So when bacteria or a fungus or a virus infects the meninges, that's when we have meningitis. It's not something that you could get just talking to me, but if you kiss the other person, or you're very close, if you have a very close contact, you share a drink, or some other type of contact like that, then that would expose you. That's why living in close contact, where you would in a dorm or in the military, makes you more susceptible to some of these causes of meningitis.
According to the National Meningitis Association, around 10 to 15% of bacterial meningitis cases prove to be fatal. While survival rates increase if the victim has antibiotic treatment introduced, around 1 in every 5 survivors live to have permanent disability.
If you have an organism like bacterial meningitis and you wait, sometimes it will cause your tissues to lose oxygen, and you could have the amputation of a limb.
Because the effects of bacterial meningitis onset quickly and can prove to be life-threatening, quick access to health care can provide a victim with a better outlook towards recovery. In some cases, such as that of Marceau's, symptoms occur so rapidly that it can turn into a matter of life and death within hours.
So they knew that I had this bacterial infection and that it was pretty far along. And so within a few hours of getting to the hospital, I started to have trouble breathing. So I was going downhill really quickly. By the time my parents got there that night, I was in lung failure. They had to intubate me. They had to basically stick a breathing tube down my throat so that I could breathe through a ventilator because my lungs were failing. They told my parents, by tomorrow you should expect that his kidneys will have failed as well. And they said, look, we can't give you any guarantee he's going to survive this, and even if he does, he's almost certainly going to lose parts of all 4 of his limbs.
Marceau spent the next 3 weeks in a medically induced coma as doctors attempted to stabilize his internal organs. Loss of circulation to his limbs caused tissue damage equaling to third-degree burns on over 30% of his body. He was then transferred to the University of Kansas Medical Center burn unit, where doctors attempted to avoid amputation by removing the dead tissue.
And even doing that, there were parts of my extremities that they couldn't save. So they had to first amputate the front half of both of my feet, and then amputate most of my fingers. So by the time I left the burn unit in August of 2004, I was so weak that I couldn't even roll over in bed on my own. I was in a wheelchair for a year, and I spent that year going back and forth to the hospital from a little apartment nearby so that I could do more physical therapy, more occupational therapy, and more surgeries, just basically try and patch my life back together.
Marceau endured through an extensive recovery process, undergoing more than 8 surgeries and multiple skin grafts. It was through the introduction of various powerful antibiotic drugs that doctors were able to clear the bacterial meningitis from his system. In having such high potential for rapid onset and life-damaging effects, health officials like Prouse recommend all individuals not only receive the FDA-approved meningitis vaccinations, but also take swift action in the event of any abnormal symptoms or indicators.
A lot of times people who don't have insurance will put off seeking health care until the last possible moment when they're having to be taken to the hospital in an ambulance. And with a disease like bacterial meningitis particularly, the sooner you seek health care, the sooner we can get antibiotics into a patient, the better likelihood that they're going to fully recover. So I would definitely say access to health care and health insurance and availability of vaccines to everyone helps prevent this disease.
Efforts in the public health sector have helped reduce the number of meningitis cases over the years, with various laws and standards having been put in place to help prevent meningitis and combat its transmission. Although such efforts have helped protect high-risk groups, with the recent outbreaks at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Princeton University, officials are examining their practices and trying to better their systems. Salisbury University Director of Student Health Services, Victoria Lentz, explains the process through which colleges and universities try to protect those deemed most at risk for contracting meningitis.
It's a Maryland state law that all college freshmen who live in dorms have the meningococcal vaccine. Right now there hasn't been anything other than us trying to keep track of students' vaccines that they turn into us. However, if students don't turn in any information, and, for example, freshmen go to move in and we haven't received any information from them, they just sign a waiver.
Lentz explains how Salisbury University is currently in the process of enacting changes in their system.
We've just gone to a new electronic medical health record. We will have a secure student portal and we'll be able to track this better. You'd have to work very quickly with meningitis, so that's why I'm hoping with our new electronic medical record and the measures that we're going to take to make sure students are immunized, that people would be protected.
It is evident that the laws and standards put in place have helped combat the issue of meningitis. While the number of overall cases has declined over the years, meningitis should still remain as a valid concern to the public.
People are stronger than they think they are. Like if somebody had told me before all of this happened to me, you will go through all of this in the course of this summer, I would have said, there's no way, I can't do it. I cannot handle that, it's impossible. But as it was happening, I found a way. I mean, every day I'd get up and I kind of faced it as I need to get through this day and not worry about what's coming after that. If I can make it through this day, then that's a victory.
Health officials recommend you take steps to protect yourself, which include getting vaccinated, staying informed, and taking responsibility for lifestyle and healthcare habits. For Traumatic Impact, I'm Phil Harper reporting.
When we come back, we'll tell you about one way to treat traumatic brain injuries that experts describe as radical and very controversial.
But for TBI sufferers, this treatment provides hope. Stay with us.
You sure you don't want some? It's chamomile. Listen, you are extremely terrifying. Just the scariest undead subhuman thing on TV, and I really mean that. But I am worried that you could give my kids nightmares if they see you, so I'm gonna have to block you. So that's it. Oh, and tell the zombies they're blocked too.
Experts agree. The long-term diagnosis for traumatic brain injury is not positive. Cognitive disorders are considered permanent for people with TBI. However, researchers are investigating ways to stop brain deterioration and even reverse brain dysfunction. Here's a look at one method that is still in the experimental phase.
The brain is the most important part of our body, yet can be damaged by sports, cars, and other physical contact. Concussions, diseases, and other physical forces lead to traumatic brain injury, or TBI. The CDC defines TBI as caused by a bump, blow, or jolt to the head or a penetrating head injury that disrupts the normal function of the brain. According to the National Center for Biotechnology information, TBI is the leading cause of death and disability in developed countries among young adults, affecting people like traumatic brain injury sufferers Matt Bovard and Jacob Cook.
I did read something, I caught myself rereading it 3 or 4 times, memory loss was I had pretty bad memory loss.
First time, I didn't think I had a concussion. I didn't want to believe that I did. That night, I actually had a band concert, and I went to school. It was 2 hours after the accident happened, and I was trying to read my music during the concert, and it was moving, and the light hurt my eyes really bad, and everyone playing up on stage was just killing my head.
Neurologist Richard Bird at Peninsula Regional Medical Center in Salisbury says this is a troubling ailment.
It's a trauma to the head, which will injure the brain, as opposed to, say, a faint or just a blackout with no injury. And there's varying degrees of minimal to virtually no trauma at all to severe trauma, which will be fatal, and everything else in between.
I was driving home from school, had a band concert that night, and it was raining. I got rear-ended pretty bad, and I pushed the brakes really hard, and I actually stretched the nerves in my neck without knowing, and I hit the back of the seat pretty hard, which gave me the concussion.
Dr. Bird explained what exactly happens to the brain when a head injury occurs.
Think of a bowl of Jell-O, and most everybody can see a bowl of Jell-O. He says, what happens when you hit the bowl of Jell-O? Now, normally the bowl of Jell-O is nicely adherent to the bowl, right? When you hit the bowl, you can see the waves go back and forth in the Jell-O, and you frequently see little tears in the Jell-O, and it pulls away from the bowl. Similar things happen inside the head, that if you damage the head, there's usually a recoil, a snap of the head or a blow to the head, and there's often always a recoil, and the brain inside will recoil back and forth.
Matt Bovard, a traumatic brain injury sufferer, explained what type of rehab the doctors offered him.
They told me what I already knew, which was, I had a concussion. They couldn't really do anything for me. So no, I haven't, other than like basic medical treatment, I haven't really had any tests or anything done.
Repairing the brain is a difficult process that has shown to have uncertain results.
It's a numbers game. How much neurons are permanently damaged and how much are temporarily injured but will recover. Depends on what the recovery is going to be.
However, a radical new treatment with a promising approach called hyperbaric oxygen therapy is making waves throughout the medical community.
They are what's known as monoplace hyperbaric chambers. Mono meaning one going in as opposed to the big ones that people mostly see hyperbaric chambers as, or multiplace chambers. So they are acrylic spheres with pressurized with 100% oxygen, or pretty much near. It's about 99.84% oxygen that we get delivered. And they're pressurized depending on the protocol for the patients to either 2 atmospheres of pressure, or about 33 feet of seawater, or 2.5 atmospheres, or about 45 feet of seawater.
According to brainandspinalcord.com, this increased oxygen wakes up dormant brain cells that became dormant through TBI. HBOT is one of few treatments for the brain that has shown this effectiveness, even years after suffering the injury.
Is hyperbaric oxygen treatment causes a lot of metabolic processes in the body to either start up or shut down. I'm not sure the exact number. I think it's about over 4,000 genes in the body are affected by hyperbaric oxygen. So that does a host of different things. So one of the big things is it causes angiogenesis, or bridges new blood capillaries in the microvascular bed of a wound. So if you have a wound bed that's hypoxic or not enough blood in it, we're now going to bridge new capillaries and blood to get to that, and you need blood with oxygen to form new tissue. So that's one of the ways, and it also causes collagen formation, or what makes up our skin, to start to fill in through a whole host of microbiological hosts.
The entire procedure can last 1 to 2 hours and needs to be repeated on a regular basis. The amount of treatments they receive depends on the severity of their case.
Treatment is on a daily basis for all patients. It's like taking any medication. You need to do it on a regular basis. So we're here Monday through Friday, and patients are here 5 days a week. That's to get the full benefit of the treatment.
Despite positive signs HBOT has shown, there has been a clear controversy regarding the effectiveness of the treatment. A major reason has to do with the lack of research done on the topic. CDC statistical analyst Dale Hitchcock explains the process unrecognized medicines, or orphan medicines, and treatments must go through for research funding.
It's NIH, National Institutes of Health, that do the funding for drugs that pharmaceutical companies don't want to do the funding for themselves. I think they're called R01 applications, and they get a researcher will send in an application to NIH for funding that they want to do clinical trials to develop a new drug, and that application at NIH goes through a really rigorous review by independent reviewers. Not people in NIH, not people connected with the government, but people they bring in, doctors, other clinicians, statisticians, researchers, to review and decide which applications get funded. Then they run the clinical trials. If they get a drug that is developed, they think it's going to work, they've tested it on animals. Then they have to go to FDA and submit their applications to get it approved to do final clinical trials, and that leads on the ability to put the new drug medicine on the market.
They're always looking for different medications that may help. We haven't gotten good medications yet that would help heal the nervous system. We try to prevent more injury, the nervous system has to heal by itself.
One of the earliest studies done by the Rockwolds over 30 years ago showed that patients who used the treatment had a 50% decrease in mortality rate. However, the improvement of cognitive function was muddled at best. Though the controversy remains strong, HBOT remains a viable alternative for TBI treatment.
Anything that would be able to help, I would definitely be willing to at least give it a try.
I think if I was sat down and told by my doctor that they would really recommend trying it, or that they think it might help accelerate the recovery process, then maybe.
Despite HBOT being safe and inexpensive, there are only 12 listed hyperbaric chambers in the state of Maryland. However, Kunz believes that HBOT will eventually become an FDA-approved medical treatment.
The future moving forward is wide open. I mean, in other countries, it's more wide open here than in the United States. In Europe, it's approved for about 30 conditions. Israel, they use it all over the place. Japan, so I think with the United States, we're behind the times, but I think we're maybe hopefully moving forward.
For Traumatic Impact, I'm Lisa Redman.
Thank you for joining us for Traumatic Impact, an extended look at traumatic brain injury in the U.S. I'm Matthew Cox.
And I'm Jared Pawar. We encourage you to visit the various websites we've displayed throughout this program. Even more information is available through government agencies like the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Thank you for tuning in.